Greetings and salutations for I, the Grand and Glorious Derry Duke, and I love college football. Go Beavers! Go Wolfpack! And, They did make their playoff. Admittedly, it was the FCS playoff, but they made the playoff. Alright, seeing as my teams had a very bad time this year, I'm gonna rant on the state of college football and how it came to this state, mostly due to conference realignment. Lovely. Now, admittedly, college football realignment wasn't all too big of an issue until about 2010, so that'll be the starting point for this video. Mostly because that's when power conferences began to shuffle around in more major ways since the 30s. Yes, Chicago did leave the Big Ten around the 30s, but do you even remember that Chicago had a football team, not a pro team, a college team? No, not Northwestern. And even if Northwestern left, don't think many people would notice. The first wave hit when Nebraska announced that it would leave to the Big Ten Conference in 2010. Now, while this was something of a bit of a shock, seeing as Nebraska has always been in the Big 12, even when it was the Big 8 in previous, it wasn't all too surprising, mostly because the Big 12, it was founded specifically to capture media markets, but it was beginning to fail to do so, and Nebraska wanted an option out, especially under Texas's thumb. Texas University had a lot of sway in the conference, even having their own network, so it made sense that Nebraska and a couple other teams later down the line would have been frustrated. The other team to leave the Big 12 at that time was Colorado, announcing their departure for the Pac-12. Now, this is indeed a special case, namely because this almost led to the first super conference of 16 teams. When Colorado left, the Pac-12 also extended invitations to Texas, Texas A&M, Texas Tech, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma State. If they would have accepted, they would have had the premier conference of the entire country, hands down the best football. However, there arose some issues between the Pac-12 network and the Longhorn network, Texas's private sports network, and the plan fell through, with Texas coming in. And if Texas wasn't going, the rest of the Big 12 schools weren't going to follow suit. In regards to the Pac-12, Colorado was not the only team to join in 2010. They were joined alongside Utah. Utah was a newcomer from the Mountain West Conference. That time, it was host to teams such as UNLV, San Diego State, New Mexico, and other solid teams of that regard. But the highlight game of the conference was always Utah and BYU. Now that Utah left the Mountain West to join the Pac-12, BYU went and sought after independence, which the Mountain West responded by bullying the WAC, as is tradition, until they lost literally all of their members, almost all of them to the Mountain West or the American. The teams added specifically in 2010 would be Boise State, San Jose State, Fresno State, Utah State, and Nevada, and Hawaii joined as a football-only member, although they all departed in 2011, which I suppose opens up that branch. The first thing that happened was, of course, the Big 12 getting screwed over once again, with Missouri and Texas A&M both announcing their departures towards the SEC. It was at this point that the Big 12 was beginning to become desperate, as they were down to 8 members, which isn't exactly 12, as you can see. The numbers simply do not line up. Instead of adding 4 new members, however, they decided to only add 2, because who cares about actually naming your conference correctly? So they added TCU from out the Mountain West, and they also added newcomer West Virginia from the imploding Big East. Oh yeah, the Big East. The Big East had already gone through a lot of conference realignment beforehand, and what happened in this season would be the final killing blow. As aforementioned, West Virginia would leave to join the Big 12, and Pitt and Syracuse would follow many other teams into joining the ACC. Another loss from the Big East would be Rutgers to the Big 10, I'll explain that later. After that, the conference backfilled a bunch of Group of 5 members, a few of those being USF, UConn, and other teams of that sort, until eventually they just dropped football altogether and formed the American out of its ashes. To explain how dire the Big East situation was, they were considering adding Boise State and San Diego State. It was bad. Now, the ACC wasn't doing all fine and dandy either. They just lost another member as well, Maryland, who, alongside Rutgers, went to join the Big Ten. Now, how did Rutgers get into the Big Ten? New York. Long story short, just New York. That's how they did it. They were absolutely rubbish as a football team, only really going decently in the Big East, so the only reason that they added Rutgers was because of the New York City market. Maryland was also very close to the Baltimore market. So as it turns out, this is when the Big Ten truly became a money-hungry tyrant. This would be the end of Big Ten expansion up until the 2020 debacle regarding the Pac-12 and stealing 4 of its teams from the Pacific Athletic Conference to play in a Midwestern Conference, where Rutgers, a team in New Jersey, plays Washington and UCLA in conference. Regionality died here. From here, things mostly stayed stable regarding Power 5 conferences. However, the same could not be said for the Group of 5, as they would soon experience a lot of shifting, mostly for the better. To begin with, not for the better, Conference USA. Conference USA had a lot of its members poached, mostly due to the Big East continuing to flounder and the American snatching up a few. The American managed to snag out from under them UCF, Houston, Memphis, SMU, East Carolina, Tulane, and Tulsa. They were fortunate enough, however, to be able to backfill from the Sun Belt. Those teams being FAU, FIU, Middle Tennessee, North Texas, and Western Kentucky. And they also stole from the WAC for Louisiana Tech and UTSA. But their poaching didn't stop there, as they also poached the Atlantic 10, a non-football conference, for Charlotte, and they also poached from the CAA, an FCS conference, for Old Dominion. This pipe dream would only last a very short while though, as the Sun Belt would have their revenge. But before the Sun Belt could strike back in full force, they needed to recover some losses. They mostly did this by snatching up teams from the FCS. Georgia State, App State, Georgia Southern, Coastal Carolina, and 2 rejects, Idaho and New Mexico State, all joined as football members. However, New Mexico State and Idaho would only last as members until 2017, when they'd be kicked out to the WAC, which eventually fell apart, forcing them into independence, and FCS relegation for Idaho. Now, the WAC also saw basically every single other member leave, as mentioned beforehand. They completely disbanded as a football conference altogether, replacing every single old member of theirs who did play football with non-football playing members. However, in 2020, they managed to make a new football conference by adding in a couple new football playing members at the FCS level and forming as an FCS conference until they lost too many members and then had to make an alliance with the WAC and then made the United Athletic Conference, which only plays football, so I don't know why it's called the Athletic Conference when you could just call it the United Football Conference. But that's a story for another time. And this video has also been going on for a bit too long, so this story of conference realignment also will have to wait till next week. Okay, toodle pip, bye.